to the movie for the autonomic nervous system. We have some questions. First, we're supposed to identify three differences between the autonomic and the somatic nervous system. So first, the control centers. Here on the left we have the somatic nervous system, and on the right we have the autonomic. So for the autonomic, the control center is here in the hypothalamus. And for the somatic, it's here in the cerebral cortex, in the primary motor cortex. And then the effectors for the ANS, it's smooth muscle, glands, cardiac muscle, and adipocytes. And for the somatic nervous system, or the SNS for short, it is skeletal muscle. And then the number of neurons in the efferent pathway. For the autonomic nervous system, there are 1, 2, because there's a ganglion in the middle. For the somatic nervous system, there's just 1. Next is describe the general functions of the three divisions of the autonomic nervous system and their spinal cord origins. So for general functions, sympathetic is known as the fight or flight division. It prepares your body for stressful situations. And its spinal cord origins would be the thoracolumbar, so it's coming from the middle of the spinal cord, the thoracic and lumbar regions. For the parasympathetic, it's known as the rest and digest division. It's activated when we're trying to conserve energy. And its spinal cord origins are from the cranial nerves and the sacral nerves, so it's known as the craniosacral division. And then for the enteric division, it controls the digestive system, and its spinal cord origins are kind of a combination. So again, sympathetic prepares us for stress, parasympathetic conserves energy, enteric is digestive. And we talked about the spinal cord origins already. Sympathetic is thoracolumbar, parasympathetic is craniosacral. Then we need to know 7 responses caused by increased sympathetic activity. Oops. And here are 7. Heightened mental alertness, increased metabolic rate, reduced digestive and urinary functions, activation of energy reserves, increased respiratory rate, increased heart rate and blood pressure, and activation of sweat glands. And all those things are getting you ready to either run away or fight. If it's bigger than you, you run away. If it's smaller than you, maybe you fight. Actually, fighting's never good. Then we need to know 5 responses caused by increased parasympathetic activity. And parasympathetic and sympathetic pretty much do opposite things. So parasympathetic is going to decrease metabolic rate. It's going to decrease heart rate and blood pressure. Increase secretion by salivary and digestive glands, so it's going to activate the digestive system. Increase blood flow and motility to the digestive tract, and stimulation of urination and defecation. So this is helping you absorb nutrients and build up nutrient reserves, whereas sympathetic, you're using the nutrient reserves to fight or run. Then where are the ganglia for the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions, and which cranial nerve carries most of the parasympathetic stimulation? If we look at this figure, we can see here's the sympathetic division, and the ganglia are located close to the spinal cord here. Their preganglionic neurons are very short, and their postganglionic neurons are very long. Whereas in the parasympathetic division, the ganglia are out here closer to the target organs. So they have long preganglionic neurons and short postganglionic neurons. And the cranial nerve that carries most of the parasympathetic stimulation is this one right here. You can see it's innervating the heart, lungs, and the whole digestive system, and that is the vagus nerve. Then we need to describe the neurotransmitters released by the ANS, their receptors, and the effect of different receptors. So this figure sums it up. The different neurotransmitters, this is showing norepinephrine and epinephrine, and depending on the type of receptor, they can have different effects. I'll summarize that in a second. So that was epinephrine and norepinephrine, and that's going to be released by the sympathetic division. Parasympathetic division is going to release acetylcholine. And again, depending on the type of receptor, it can have different effects. So the sympathetic uses norepinephrine and epinephrine. Alpha 1 receptors, it's going to be excitatory. Alpha 2 receptors, it's going to be inhibitory. For beta 1 receptors, they're going to be excitatory. Beta 2s are going to inhibit. Beta 3s are going to excite. For the parasympathetic, it releases acetylcholine. Nicotinic receptors are going to cause excitation. And for muscarinic receptors, it can be either excitation or inhibition. So it's really more complex than that, but that's as much as we need to know for this class. Next question is describe the effects of sympathetic activation and the effects of parasympathetic activation. So this is showing the sympathetic. Sometimes it uses the adrenal medulla, or it uses a sympathetic ganglion. And if it's using the adrenal medulla, those things are going to be carried through the blood. Okay, so here's the effects of the sympathetic activation: increased alertness, feeling of energy, increased heart rate, breathing rate, and blood pressure, increased muscle tone, and mobilization of energy reserves. And again, all those things are getting you ready to fight or run away. And then effects of parasympathetic stimulation would be constriction of pupils, secretion by digestive glands, secretion of hormones that promote absorption and utilization of nutrients, changes in blood flow associated with sexual arousal, increased motility of the digestive tract, stimulation of defecation, contraction of the urinary bladder, constriction of respiratory passages, reduction in heart rate and force of contraction. And again, all those things are allowing you to conserve energy, build up your nutrient reserves, and rest. What is dual innervation? This table from your book shows you that most things are stimulated by both the ANS and, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic branches of the autonomic nervous system. So, for example, the eye. Sympathetic is going to cause dilation of the pupil. Parasympathetic is going to cause constriction of pupil. So, again, opposite effects. Some things are only affected or only innervated by the sympathetic. For example, the sweat glands and the erector pili muscles are only innervated by the sympathetic. Again, blood vessels are only innervated by the sympathetic. The heart is innervated by both. So sympathetic is going to increase heart rate, force of contraction, and blood pressure. Parasympathetic is going to do the opposite: decrease heart rate, force of contraction, and blood pressure. So dual innervation is that most organs are innervated by both the sympathetic and parasympathetic, and they're going to have opposite effects. And you don't need to memorize this whole chart, but it's there for you. So this is a good example of this. So at rest, both divisions are active at low levels, but parasympathetic is more dominant, so that keeps our heart rate relatively low. Increased parasympathetic stimulation would lower the heart rate even further. Parasympathetic inhibition or sympathetic stimulation would increase the heart rate. And increased sympathetic stimulation combined with parasympathetic inhibition will raise the heart rate really high. So, for example, if you were exercising, it might get this high. And there's a balance in between the two, depending on what your body needs at that time. Alright, describe a visceral reflex and what is the difference between a long and a short reflex? Visceral is stuff in our guts. The visceral reflexes are mainly controlling the digestive system. They're all automatic, like all reflexes. So it's a reflex that controls our internal organs, mainly our digestive organs. And then this figure shows short reflexes. Here's a short reflex and here's a long reflex. And the difference is a short reflex involves an autonomic ganglion and then goes right to the effector. A long reflex goes to the spinal cord or the brain, so there's an extra step in that. So short reflexes are faster because they bypass the central nervous system. That's the main difference. Then we want to describe the role of baro and chemoreceptors in the ANS. So baroreceptors are pressure receptors, and one thing they do is monitor our blood pressure. And then if our blood pressure gets too high, it will tell the parasympathetic division to send some stimulation. If blood pressure gets too low, it will tell the sympathetic division to send some stimulation. It also monitors the pressure in the lungs, and again, depending on what's necessary, it will have either the sympathetic or parasympathetic division send some stimulation. Receptors in the digestive tract tell us what's in the digestive tract, and if the digestive tract is too full, it will send more parasympathetic stimulation to get things moving through there. Also the bladder, also when those are active, they will cause the parasympathetic nervous system to become active and allow you to urinate. Chemoreceptors respond to chemicals, and there's a couple different ones. One responds to the pH levels of blood and also the PCO2 levels. So we have these in our medulla oblongata, and so say for example the PCO2 level gets too high. That means there's too much carbon dioxide in our blood. Then we're going to activate the sympathetic nervous system, which would increase our breathing rate, which would help us to get rid of that extra carbon dioxide. There are also chemoreceptors in our blood vessels and in the heart, monitoring the pH, the carbon dioxide, and the oxygen levels in the blood. And again, if carbon dioxide gets too high, we stimulate the sympathetic nervous system to increase our breathing rate. If carbon dioxide gets too low, that can also be a problem, so we would stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system and slow down our breathing rate and allow carbon dioxide to build up again. And finally, the hypothalamus controls the autonomic nervous system, but it is influenced by higher brain centers. So hypothalamus has the main control, but depending on input it gets from the thalamus or the limbic system or the cerebral cortex, it will adjust things. Hypothalamus sends signals to the pons for respiratory control, the medulla oblongata for control of the heart rate. And that is chapter 14. Send me an email if you have any questions.